Hi there, my name is Chris with FileHold Document Management Software, and welcome to this video tour about what is a DMS. This is an introduction video for people who are not sure what document management software is and are wondering if it might be the right sort of solution for your organization. This video will kind of take you through some of the basic concepts and so you'll understand what a DMS is. This is not meant to be a thorough sort of examination of what FileHold is, but more about the category of document management software, and maybe you might find this useful. So let's start by asking what it was like to file documents at one time. It used to mean storing paper, and we all can imagine those rooms full of files, filing cabinets, shelves full of paper. That was the typical way we used to file documents. Now, that sort of system had some benefits. Let's acknowledge that to start off with. First of all, it was tangible. You could see these resources. You could put your hands on them. You could pick up pieces of paper. There's something satisfying about that physical nature. It was also a reliable system. You could see the paper on the shelf. You always knew that it was there. And because of that, you could always sort of figure out how many documents you had. I mean, some people still talk to us about, I've got 26 full filing cabinets and they're overflowing, or I've got an entire room full of paper that needs to be stored. Really what we're talking about with this is the ability to look at that paper and say, yes, I know I have this many thousand documents or whatever, and you can get a rough sense of it so you can estimate that volume. You can also retain handwritten notes and signatures and parts of that stuff that can only really exist with a physical document, so you're able to keep that as well with a paper document. And most importantly, it's low skill to handle. Once you teach someone how to file a document, presumably they'll always be able to replicate that action. Now, whether or not they actually do, that's a different question, but at least it's a low skill task to be able to do. However, there are obviously challenges with those paper documents. First of all, they're bulky. They take up space. As we saw from that picture of all those different files, we know that every shelf space, every piece of real estate is important, and it's a cost to the business. And having those paper documents there does take up that space. It does create bulk. There's also the process of filing and refiling, and both those actions have to happen with accuracy. You have to put the right document in the right place so it can be found later, and more importantly, when you pull a document, you have to put it back into that place later. So there's an act of filing and refiling that needs to be addressed. And that means that your system is only going to be as accurate as whatever sort of filing organization that you have and the team that's actually putting it together. So again, low skill to be able to do it, but to be able to do it reliably, maybe a higher skill than some of your team may be able to perform. Now, I'm not saying that most people are stupid and can't do their filing, but people get busy. Sometimes there's too much that they have on their plate, and they're not able to get to their filing straight away, and more importantly, they're refiling, and documents can get lost that way. There's no backups to a paper document system. So when you're dealing with paper, you only have that copy of the paper. You can physically make a photocopy of that document, and then you can store it in an offline or an off-site location, but then you end up with the same problem that you had before, where you've got way too much paper hanging around. There's also no off-site access to those documents. The document only exists in its one place. If you want someone else to be able to get access to that paper document, you have to physically copy it and send it to the second location, creating a duplication and creating all the same space issues. So basically, if you're not in the office where you can get the paper, and sometimes that can be a challenge, you can't actually see what's there. And lastly, there's no quality control in those documents. We need to think about this as something that's happening with it. When you're looking at that document, you don't know if it's completed. You don't know if there's information missing on it. It's not a completed document at that point. It's just a piece of paper. And this also leads us to there's no document lifecycle management. The document lifecycle means all your policies apply to that document from the moment it arrives to the moment you have to dispose of it. And sort of any review processes or retention, there's no way to manage that document with the paper itself. You have to remember to do that. You have to create reminders to yourself. It's another process of having to deal with it. So overall, it's an inefficient system. It's not creating paper documents are not the best way to deal with these objects. And then we moved over to digital documents, which is the other sort of category of how we're keeping things. And they're easier to make and ultimately more difficult to store. You can see here's an example of a sort of a folder, subfolder system that you might see within an organization where you're seeing tons of documents, similarly named documents, and they can ultimately form a kind of clutter. But before we talk about negatives, let's talk about the benefits of a digital document. And the first thing is it can be backed up. So you can actually take all of your digital documents, copy them, and have them recallable in an offsite location or in a secondary backup or even a tertiary backup, ways that you're able to access those documents in the future. So you have more than just the paper, you have a digital record of it. Now you can also make infinite copies of those documents. Think of a piece of paper. If I make a photocopy of that, the photocopy will be of lower quality than the original. If I make a copy of that copy, then it's going to be a lower quality version again. With, for example, a PDF, the first copy of that PDF will be identical to the 1,000th copy of that PDF. And that ability to infinitely create copies of those documents is powerful when it comes to things like templates, when it comes to documents that you're mass producing regularly. That ability to infinitely copy is extremely powerful, not something to sort of ignore. There's also minimal storage. You think of how much space it takes to store a piece of paper versus how much physical space it takes on a drive to store that same piece of paper, whether it was a digital document like it came from Word or whether it was just a scan of that document. The storage space is drastically reduced. You can store libraries of information inside of a single server. So it's a very powerful way to keep these documents stored in a way that doesn't take up a huge footprint within the organization. They're also remotely accessible. So it means that if you're not actually in the building, unlike with paper, where you can't actually get your hands on the document, digital documents can be made remotely accessible. You can get to them when you're not working within the physical office. They're also highly searchable. So the only way to find a paper document is to go into and look for it within the filing system. That's all you have. There's a lot more things you can search for. You can search for file names. Sometimes you can search for document contents. There's a lot of different ways that you can search for digital documents that just make them a lot more useful as an asset. But of course, as you'd expect, there are some challenges that come with digital documents as well. The first thing is that they can be made too easily, and it can lead to redundancy. You can have too many copies of the same file. You can ultimately end up with 6 or 7 copies of the same document residing all over the place. Which one is the current one? Which one is the most accurate one? These are all questions that a digital process needs to be able to answer. Each person can have their own filing system within a digital archive. What you have is you can have potentially a non-centralized system. Or another way of thinking of it, you could have a server where everyone has their own drive location and everyone's filing their own documents in their own way. And this means that if somebody needs to find something in another server, it's very difficult for them because they have to understand the filing system first before they can find their first document. Access to these documents can be more or less all or nothing. So either you can see everything that's in the system, or you can see none of them that's in the system. Or IT has to be very much involved on a day-to-day basis and try to get in there and control those access permissions. So typically what they end up with saying is, right, you can see everything over here, or you can see nothing over here. And that ends up with people maybe accessing confidential files, or more importantly, hiding all the documents for fear of exposing a confidential file. The only way to group these documents is with subfolders. As I showed in that image before, in order for me to group documents of a similar project together, I have to create a subfolder. And then that means that maybe that's going to be a subfolder of another folder, and another folder, and another folder. So I end up with subfolders, which is almost impossible for someone to locate if they don't understand your filing system in the first place. This means there's a non-intuitive structure. So when you walk into it, you're not really seeing your documents in the most logically laid out way, or the logic that's been applied to organizing those documents has really been applied for the individual trying to find something within the system. You also don't know what the latest version of a document is, and we've all seen this sometimes with people who have systems where they'll have a document that says, here's the contract draft, and it's the final version, and then it goes to somebody else, and then it becomes the final, and then it becomes the final volume 3, or final version 17, or etc., etc. And you end up not knowing which document is the most current version of it. You can sometimes try to guess by dates, but again, you have to try to figure that out on your own. There's nothing managing that for you. And you also can't tell the document intent apart. This document over here says it's a contract, but is it really a contract? What's its contents? Is this the original template of a document, or is this something else? What I have to do is I have to try to figure out what that intention is. And of course, there's no document lifecycle management with these sort of digital systems. Is that again, if you have a reminder that something has to be looked at, you have to set a calendar note to yourself and come back to it. So you're not getting that lifecycle management being provided for you. As a result, we end up with information overload. Just too much going on in the system, too much to try to manage, and too much to try to track. And so as a solution to that, you can consider a document management software, or DMS. As you can see, document management software, it's a category of software. It can often be part of a content management system. It can be part of an enterprise content management system. There's all kinds of different ways of talking about it. I'm going to speak generically about document management software. I'm going to try to keep away from FileHold just for this one part of it, because I want people to understand that DMS is a broad category of software, and we happen to fit very well into that category. But it's still worth having just a brief word about what a DMS actually is within a system. The first thing is DMS provides both ways of sort of filing these documents together. We're kind of taking the best of both worlds of a paper-based and a digital record-based system of storing documents. So with the paper-based system, we have the same logical organization. It's very easy to find content into there. It's more intuitive to use. Once you understand how to use a DMS, you'll always be able to use it moving forward. The system is usually intuitive so you can understand. Document contents in there are shareable. We're controlling that share, but we're still making them shareable. It's not like I have my personal stash of information. It's just like a filing cabinet. If I can open the cabinet, I can get access to the documents into there. This is a shareable system. I can store any kind of document. A filing cabinet doesn't care what you shove into it. It could be invoices, it could be a ham sandwich. Nothing within a filing cabinet cares about what you're putting into the system. And again, we can do the same thing with a DMS. We can store any kind of document. We're less flexible in the ham sandwich, but we can certainly store whether it's an invoice as a PDF, a proprietary format of the organization that you're using, CAD files, physical records that you're keeping track of. We can store all those kind of things. So when we store any kind of document, that's what we're talking about. And this leads to the flexibility of that paper-based system. That it's very easy to add content into there. Oh, you want to start adding these kind of documents into that file over there? Absolutely, we can support that. It's a flexible system. On the digital side of things, we're bringing a lot of those positive benefits over as well. We're creating a searchable system. We're putting access control. Do you have a key to that filing cabinet? Well, with a DMS and a digital system, we can provide that access control, but with much more granular detail, so we can break that down for people. It's an infinitely expandable system. If I wanted to add another filing cabinet into my office, I need to physically make space for that. Whereas with a digital system, it's very easy to add additional storage in to expand out the ability to store those things without actually adding more footprint to the real estate. Obviously, you can back it up. That's a huge thing. So if there's a fire or flood or something happens, a tornado hits, you suddenly have a freeze hits and all your pipes burst, you don't lose that paper. You can have an offsite backup. And that's part of that very small size that you can have for your actual footprint for your documents. What are DMS used for? What are some of the common applications that people come to FileHold and ask, we need a DMS? Well, we typically see the most common one, they're going paperless. When you're starting to move away from a paper-based system, a DMS is a perfect way to store those documents in the repository. We often see people using it to digitize their archives. So as opposed to going paperless with their day-to-day documents moving forward, maybe they have already done that, but they have a filing room full of old paper that they want to make more useful. So they're going to come to us to digitize that archive. Centralizing a document repository. When you're in a shared environment, oftentimes people will have their own individual repositories. These are my documents over here. Those are your documents over there. A DMS can centralize that and still allow control. So I still have my documents in my place, but they're in the same shared repository. That means sharing documents much more easy between different departments, different users, different people. It sort of allows that to happen in a more seamless environment. It's also used for regulatory compliance. Quite often you'll see different standards like ISO or HIPAA or CFR Part 11 sort of compliance for the FDA. These are different sort of regulatory compliance issues that need to be addressed. And because of that, you need to have a digital repository, but more importantly, you need to have a DMS to control those documents in the process. It also makes sure that information can be found. This is a key thing that we quite often see, is that people have a digital system, but they're not able to find the content within there. DMS has some great tools to make sure that information can be found whenever it's needed. It also allows for greater document efficiencies, so the ability to share documents, to do workflow on a document, to have them signed off, to make sure that they can be searched for, to create a structured environment. These are all really important things to make sure that your organization is efficiently using your documents. Now, what else can a DMS do? I talked about some of the benefits that it has from paper-based versus an electronic filing, but there's some other things it can do. One of the key things is fine-tuned access control. So as opposed to a filing cabinet where I kind of have to give you access to the drawer and you can see every folder in there, we can control those controls with much more detail. For instance, I can say you can see this folder but not that one within the drawer. Or I can say you can see this document type but not that document type. Or you can see this document type and you're a read-only user, whereas that document type, you can check that document out, make a change, and bring it back in. So you have very granular control over who can access the document. You have total document lifecycle management. So from the moment the document enters into FileHold or any other DMS, we can start to track things like when does this need to be reviewed? When does this need to be archived? When is this document no longer needed in the system? Does this document have private information that needs to be destroyed after a length of time? Then yes, we can control all of that. Or perhaps you have something like a lifetime warranty on a project and you want to hold on to that contract in perpetuity. We can manage that as well. We allow version control in a document. So version control means that I always know which is the current version of it. I can check a document out, make a change to it, and check it back in as a new version. When another user comes into the system and they want to see that document, they know they're always looking at the current version of it. So I don't have to worry about final version 3, etc., etc. It allows for collaboration. This check-in, check-out process means that I can do a draft on a document and I can add it into the system. You can check that document out, make changes to it, and check it back in. We've bounced this document back and forth. We're able to send it to each other via workflow. We're able to collaborate on this together to make sure that the document is in its best state before it reaches its final goal. It allows me to record all the activity that's happening in the system. I know who's accessed which document and when. That's part of the audit trail. I'll touch on that later on, but it's a really important part of a DMS that gives far greater control over these documents than you have in a paper-based process where I can have no idea who's accessed it, or in a digital system where those can be muddy footprints. It's very controlled within a DMS. We can tag document with content with the DMS. Again, something that you're not able to do with most digital repositories, and something you're certainly not able to do with a filing cabinet, is I can say that all these documents over here, I'm going to tag these by the vendor name, and then I can do a search for that and just look for that one point of information. That's metadata, and I'm going to spend a moment talking about that in a second as well. This is part of a fully searchable repository. So not only am I searching by document content, so I can search by, for instance, in a Word file, I can look in the actual text of that document, but I can also look for these tags, I can look for version property information. I have a lot of information and ways that I can find that information and pull it out whenever I need to. And finally, reviews and approvals. Workflow is such a vital part of any kind of DMS. It's the ability to go in and pull content out of there, send it to somebody else for review or approval. Super powerful tool, and absolutely something that is vital in a modern working organization. This also leads me to integrating with other software. So we have the ability to reach out to other software, tie with it, pass information back and forth, search for something while you're in another system. Again, it's a lot of powerful tools that a DMS can provide for your organization. Now, that's in closing. I just want to cover a couple of terms here. The idea of this is I want you to have some vocabulary so that if you want to see a demonstration of FileHold or take a look at some of our other videos, at least you'll have an understanding of what you're seeing on screen. And I want to take sort of a deeper dive into these because these are really important terms for document management and for the field of information management, that you understand kind of some of the language that we use. The biggest word that we're going to use is metadata, and metadata is a really common thing that we're seeing nowadays. Metadata is information about information. Now, we're actually gotten used to this with things like Twitter. We can see hashtags on something, so hashtag DMS might be an example of something. When I tweet out, I might put that onto my note so that anyone who's looking for information about a DMS, they can see that tag and come back over there. These tags help to classify and organize documents with common and distinct information. So sometimes metadata might be specific to one use type or one type of project, whereas other metadata fields might be common amongst multiple kinds of documents. And it helps me to classify these to organize them. Now, there are different types of metadata that you may encounter. The first one is descriptive metadata, and it's about the document content and use, and it's more about how I'm planning on looking for this document or using it. It describes what's the information about the document. Administrative metadata, on the other hand, is system information. It's automatically created by the software, and it sort of tags things like who owns this document, the date it was first added to the system, has it gone through a workflow, what was its last revision date. These are things that are going to be outside of the user's control, but we're generating it for them in the background. And the third kind of metadata is structural metadata, where it lives in the system, and again, this is automatically created information. Now, the important part of that is that these three things create what we call a structured environment for your data. If you have metadata about all of these fields, you're creating a very powerful environment. But I want to keep focused on this, that we're really going to be talking about descriptive metadata. For most of the time we talk about metadata within a DMS. The administrative and the structural metadata is being automatically generated. The descriptive metadata is the user content. This is what we're attaching to it. So when I use the term metadata, think descriptive metadata. Think about how I'm actually describing the object in case. Now, there's a second concept with this, which is the schema. And schema is a document use type. It's how I'm actually planning on using a document as opposed to the software I might use to open it. So it's what allows me to say that this is a category, such as an invoice or a contract or a sales order, as opposed to the software I might be using to open it, like a PDF or Word or something like that. I'm going to be using instead the category for the document. This is an invoice, this is a contract, this is a sales order, etc. Now, with that, it means I can have different types of documents that could be the same schema. So a PDF or a Word file could both be classified as an invoice or an SOP or whatever document type I wanted to assign that to. Now, the reason schema is important is because we're going to combine schema and metadata. Metadata are attached to schemas, so it could be unique, like an invoice number, or a shared value, like a PO number. So consider if I had a schema for an invoice, I might have metadata fields for that, like an invoice number, a date, a vendor, a total. Maybe I have a PO number attached to that. On the other hand, I might have a contract that has a matter number, a signee, or date of signature, and those are all unique fields. But maybe that's a contract that's related to the invoice. So maybe I might want to have the invoice number or a reference number or a PO number or something like that attached to the contract as well. I can do that. And it links these two documents together. It shows a relationship between them that otherwise they wouldn't have any use for it. So instead of saying, I'm looking for all the documents that are involved with the Acme company, I can say, show me all invoices from Acme. Okay, now that I've looked at that, I've found a matter number, show me all documents with that matter number, and I can pull up both the invoice and the contract. So it allows me to pull multiple points of information together. Now, why does a DMS need metadata? Why do we use metadata within a DMS? The first thing is structure. I've mentioned this before, and you might hear this term in information management. And what structure means is that I can take this document and I can transport it from one system to another and it has a recognized format. I know when I'm given document X where it's going to live in the system and what kind of metadata it's going to have attached to it based on its structure. So it allows me to apply this globally across the organization. This also means that I have tags for searching and filtering. So I can look for information, I can filter information, so I can say, show me all documents. Okay, now show me all documents that are invoices. Okay, show me all documents that are invoices, but only ones from the Acme company. Okay, show me ones that are invoices from the Acme company in the last 6 months. And I can filter down until I can find just the documents I'm looking for. As opposed to when I had to do with a physical filing cabinet, walking over and flipping through folders until I find the right document. I can eliminate all of that processing by simply giving me some power in the background. I can organize my documents this way. So again, I'm going to be storing, here's a folder that I have that are going to be invoices, so I'm only going to put invoice documents into there. It allows me to put some organization into that system so that I don't have to bother trying to guess where those documents might be. This also gives me a common language. If I'm saying that all my documents are going to be tagged with an invoice number, then everyone understands what that means. It seems fairly obvious. But think about that contract I was saying before, and we have a matter number that's attached to it. I'm going to define what the matter number is within my organization, and then anybody who comes in can be said, by the way, all our contracts have a matter number, and here it is over here, and I can point that out on the document. And now there's a common language, so I know when I'm looking for all documents related to something, I know to look for matter number, or invoice number, or whatever value I want to find. This common language means that I'm breaking down that sort of individual filing system, but I'm still able to reflect the needs of the organization. If the organization decides we're going to use invoice numbers, you can use invoice numbers. You can use whatever makes sense for what your team is using together. It also can be used for document naming. So one of the challenges that you'll often see with a digital filing system is naming conventions for documents. They have to be enforced, and they have to make sure they're consistent within the organization. By using metadata, we can name those documents with the same formatting each time so that I don't have to manage that. More importantly, I don't have to micromanage that. I don't have to step into somebody and say, you're not naming your documents correctly. What a waste of everyone's time. We can take care of that for you automatically. And this is why we can deal with information overload. By using these metadata tags, we can find the things we need very quickly and get back to the actual job that we need to do and generate some income for the organization. The last term to introduce is Audit Trail. An audit trail is something that a document management software will produce to create a record of activity. So it's a record of who did what in the repository and when they did it, with a timestamp attached to that action. And this is used because you want to be able to track all of those actions along with that date and timestamp as to when it was done. And that's important because a lot of regulatory compliance actions will require you to be able to say who's accessed this document, who had permission to see this area. Your audit trail tracks all of this activity, and that you can pull up these actions with very simple reporting tools to be able to pull them out for later on. And it means that there's an accountability built within the software. That means that you can then go out and look for those documents and make sure that people are in fact finding the information they need, and you know who's looked at what when. And as an audit record, that can be vital to to ISO, it can be vital to HIPAA. There's a lot of areas where you're going to need to be able to prove who has access to these documents and who has accessed these documents. And with that, I just wanted to thank you very much for watching this video today. If you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call or drop us an email to sales@filehold.com. This has just been an introduction over the software. Please get in touch with us. Please explore some of the other videos. Have a look around and see what there is with the world of DMS. We'd be happy to answer any questions or go further with some of these more in-depth discussions. Take a look at what schema or metadata would make sense for your organization. We're always happy to reach out and have a conversation. Thank you so much.